I'm not a diplomat, so why am I talking to you about diplomacy? When I was 9 years old, I founded a newspaper called the Four Corners Blabbermouth. It got its name because I lived across the street from my four friends in a square. The newspaper had all of the sections you'd expect: hard neighborhood news, sports, weather, even a movie review and a crossword puzzle. We made my mom the editor and publisher because she was the only one who knew how to type. Someone asked me, why did you do that? And I don't know. I was curious about the world. It was interesting to learn about what the neighbors thought about different perspectives. And I do have to admit that it was kind of fun to get everyone in the neighborhood working on something that I was interested in. Maybe perhaps getting people to do things my way. As an educator, I get to work with some of the smartest minds in the world at a top-flight university. I build upon the lessons I've learned working around the world at the UN, and I have a chance to teach young minds and prepare them for their careers and complex international negotiation competitions. But what is diplomacy? It's sometimes hard to visualize. Diplomacy sounds sort of fancy pants, like people in elegant clothing, clinking glasses, and far-off embassies. And that's not entirely untrue. But diplomacy has evolved and means a number of things over time. To some, it's policy in grand costume. To others, the patriotic art of lying for one's country. The continuation of war by other means. Or my favorite definition, the art of saying nice doggy until you can get a rock. But still, it is hard to visualize what is diplomacy. I mean, think about the last movie you saw with a diplomat. Argo was about diplomats being rescued. The Interpreter had translators being chased around the UN by assassins. Okay, Madam Secretary, if we count television, but just to make it interesting, she comes from the CIA. Diplomats are wise to the world's realities. Think about Machiavelli. He was an astute student of diplomacy, politics, and human nature. And he wrote his master treatise, The Prince, after he had been thrown out from ruling in Florence, tortured by the Medicis, in an effort to get back into power and to show the family how to be effective political rulers. There are three things that you can do to master the art of diplomacy that diplomats do better than the rest of us. First, they know their history. Second, they master the cultural nuances. And third, they are the ultimate people persons. As you develop those skills, you can become someone who can let others have your way. First, history. The art of diplomacy is based on historical understanding. Now, I know what you're saying. Blah, history. Who likes that? But history is very important. It provides perspective and an opportunity for us to understand things in a longer time frame. It's a very important skill. Ernest May and Richard Neustadt, Harvard historians, came up with the term thinking in the context of time. This is not to say that history tells us what to do, but rather it provides questions and critical insights and ideas that explain the cultural time or the historical epoch and the problems that we're confronting. One of the ways I like to teach history to students is through historical simulations. Some of my favorite are brokering peace in the Balkans, the Taiwan Straits, or a student favorite, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Imagine this. Students are playing the role of the various people and groups. Will Fidel Castro's war council be able to push back against pressure from the Russians and the United States? Will Khrushchev broker peace by sending unofficial emissaries? And can JFK resist his generals who are urging him to attack? Let me tell you how this usually works. After a while, students get kind of frustrated. The United States decides to attack. The USSR counterattacks nuclear World War III. This is not the best outcome. But what students learn is that thinking in history is difficult, complicated, and it feels real. Diplomats master this skill and use it to their advantage in brokering compromise and understanding other positions. Next, culture. If you're going to work with foreign emissaries, it makes sense that you should learn foreign languages. Diplomats also master economics, politics, religion, and of course culture. So they know, why does someone put mustard on their pancake when they should be putting syrup? Or more importantly, how do you endear yourself to someone rather than offend them, especially if you're going to be party to a very lengthy negotiation? Consider for a minute the Shanghai communique, an important document that you maybe haven't heard of that's just a stack of papers, but it reshaped the way the United States of America and the People's Republic of China had interacted since 1972. This agreement, which was very tricky to achieve, is based on a number of challenges that were overcome. How to keep the peace in the neighborhood, the tricky Taiwan question, and one word. The word, recognize. Now in English, we have one word that does the job for us, but in Chinese, there are many versions. One version is to see. Another version is to grant legitimacy. Can you see the problem? How did Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai overcome 23 years of diplomatic stalemate? By understanding the culture and language differences between their countries and working toward a compromise. It's kind of the reason that some people think why you can go to Costco down the street and buy an inexpensive television, or why many of our children in Utah schools are learning Mandarin. The art of diplomacy applied through the lens of culture is powerful, and diplomats are masters at that. The third area in the art of diplomacy is people. Diplomats understand relationship problems, hashtag, right? They are the ultimate people persons. And how do they do that? You would imagine that after World War II, the world was exhausted and ready for peace. A number of institutions and ideas and concepts were being kicked around to never go backwards in history. One of those is a document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a general statement of principles that everyone should agree upon. It's kind of like pulling your kids in and saying, eat your dinner, clean your room, and don't punch your brother. The process to negotiate that document was anything but easy. Eleanor Roosevelt, the United States representative, wrote the following about her experience in developing this document. Intrigue, lobbying, secret arrangements, blocks, etc. It's terrible. Power politics and bargaining nauseate me. There is so much unreality and play and sham that I can't swing myself into this atmosphere and act. Fortunately, she was able to do that, and the document was signed. How do diplomats do this? How do they deal with the most difficult people? Well, there are a number of hacks and tactics that you can use. One in particular involves listening. I tell my students when they go into a room, the first thing they should do is not go up and give an important speech or slam their fist down and state their position, but rather go up to people and ask them, what do you think? It's unexpected, it lowers their guard, but it also is very important because it helps you understand what it is they want from the equation. Persuasion is not like we imagine. It's not taking your views and convincing someone else that their views are wrong. It works like this. Taking 1 plus 1 equals 3. Or in other words, your ideas plus my ideas into a new reality. It arranges the consensus in a shared understanding, which is very different from forcing someone to do things your way. Another tactic that diplomats use is to reframe the problem. A good friend of mine, who is the ambassador of a Central European country, was at a negotiation. He had been there for months, working out deals, making promises, and using his capital back and forth between many countries. One day before the vote, he received a communique from his capital. It said, "Vote against the document." No explanation. So what do? If you vote against the document, you undermine everything that you've been working for the past months, not to mention you will be completely ineffective in the future in representing any interest your country has. On the other hand, if you vote for the document, you will be unemployed. What did he do? The ambassador found a third way. He recognized that there was an arcane rule that allowed someone to vote on the document that was currently being negotiated, not the final document his government opposed. He quickly gathered support, called for an intermediate vote. The document, as it stood with the language he could support, was voted by acclamation. The parts that were bad were thrown out. Mission accomplished. If you can reframe the problem and look at it from a different perspective, you can get even a group of people to have your way. Another challenge that diplomats face, probably the biggest of all, is conflict. Now, most of us fear it. Some people thrive in conflict, but diplomats run toward it because they recognize it as a powerful tool. You may experience conflict if you've ever gone into a Chinese market where the prices are not set. I once took my son and explained it this way to him. We're going to go in, and the seller's going to ask a high price. We're going to counter with a low price. And then in the end, we probably would pay $30 for the purse. So, just as I had explained, the seller asked for $50. I quickly countered with $10. My son immediately blurted out, "But Dad, I thought we were going to pay $30. Conflict is difficult and tricky, and it's hard to know if you're doing what's right. If you have a plan, you know your red lines, you know where you can compromise, you can find ways to get to solutions. And that's an important thing. I tell my students frequently, words matter. In the art of diplomacy, if you can do the things I mentioned, if you can master history, understand the culture, and master your relationships with people, the other alternative is not as good, letting others have your way.